Auzubillahiminashaitanirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalatu wassalamu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tayyibin at-tahirin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilma. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is a surprise Facebook Live session. I had actually prepared it to do it somewhere in person, and because of the weather, that didn't happen. So, here it is. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about 5 things to consider before you say yes. And what are we talking about? Youth today have many different challenges in terms of settling down, making, starting their new families and finding the right spouse. So the 3 main challenges that when I speak to youth, they have is, the first is the challenge of actually finding a partner. Many of our youth, they're ready to settle down, and for whatever reason they are having a challenge to meet the right person, and this again is a huge subject which we can't really go into today. The second challenge is obviously when you meet somebody to make the decision with your head and your heart. So to find the right person, and what that means is what we're going to be talking about. And lastly, the challenge is of making the relationship last. As we know, marriage today is much more fragile than it used to be in the past, and that is no exception among the Muslim families. A lot of us are finding it extremely difficult to make our relationships last, and part of that might be that when we are doing the matchmaking process, and when we're trying to assess whether the person is the right person to settle down with, the more effort we put into that, the easier it is obviously it doesn't mean that even if you find the perfect match, marriage is still a lot of hard work, but obviously the more and we talk about what compatibility means and all of that. So today we will basically focus on making the right decision. So why is this such a challenge these days? For many reasons. First of all, we know that society is much more diverse than it ever was. Those of us living in North America especially, we have come from all over the place. When we were settling down, when my generation was meeting people, we all had a shared value system. We were all we grew up in the same community, we grew up in the same society, and so things were easier from that end. Now we are coming from many different cultures, so even though we may be from the same denomination, we may be practicing the same way, but it is still the diversity of cultures does make it a little bit more challenging. Also, Muslims today tend to be much more polarized in religious practice. We know that. Many, like even a couple of decades ago, people were much more similar. And now the challenge is that either you tend to be extremely practicing or not at all. It is difficult to find people who are, and I don't like the word moderate, so I won't say that. But again, and people tend to be much more in camps. And this is a problem whether you are very practicing medium or not practicing at all. So another thing was that when my generation was growing up, we all had very established social norms. You went to school, and after that you found somebody and settled down. These days, obviously, there is much more subjective values. People are waiting longer. They are waiting to settle down, to get their first career in order. And again, there are pros and cons to both these things. People are very much more mobile, so they obviously travel for work. They may be settling down in different places. They may have gone away to university. And why this is a problem is, again, because the people that the youth may meet, is what we call incubator relationships. What does that mean? So incubator relationship means that you are only seeing that person in one setting. So for example, if you are in university and both of you are away from home, you really don't know what the background of that person is. You're only seeing them in a very select kind of way, and this can be a challenge. Also, we have much more of community matchmaking initiatives, and this obviously is a much needed thing within our communities, and it is extremely useful, but it does have its challenges. What are some of the challenges? The challenges are that the people who are usually making the matches have incomplete information. So they may have been talking to the parents, and the parents give them a list of criteria that they have for their child to to find a suitable match, and the child actually may have completely different ideas of who they want to end up with. So again, if there are any people who are community matchmakers listening to this, this is extremely important. Why? Always speak to the child in private, because it doesn't serve anybody if two people are making different if they're giving you different information. And unfortunately, in my field, we come across people who say that they were forced into the marriage, or even if they were not forced, they were strongly influenced by the parents in order to settle down with someone, and it wasn't their choice. So, and what I mean by incomplete information is also that people who are making the matches are only going by a piece of paper usually. They are going by what the person tells them. So again, this is not a bad thing for the first round, but also the more domains you see a person in, it will give you a much better, much more complete view of that person. What do I mean by different domains? So a person, how they are with friends, how they are with their family, how they are at work, how they are in the community, how they might be in the mosque setting. These are all different areas of a person's life. And if you've only seen them in one area, it is quite likely that you will only see a very incomplete picture of the person. So given these factors, it is obviously more challenging these days to find suitable spouses. So what are we to do? A lot of things that come out from the field are these books of questions. It's always interesting to me when you read something which says 25, or I've seen 50 or 100 questions to ask ask a potential person before making the decision. And personally, it's not a bad idea to look at the questions, but honestly, I'm not sure how helpful they are. First of all, the questions run from a gamut from, do you have pets? I actually saw this. Do you have pets? To, what kind of job do you want, or where are you working? To what are your interests? Do you like to ski, for example? And, what your faith is. Now, obviously, if you have a list of 300 questions, it's extremely difficult to see what is more valuable or what you should prioritize, because it's very highly unlikely that you will meet somebody who even meets 150 of those questions of 300. And I'm not sure that it's all that valuable, because, again, marriage, when you end up with a person, it comes with a package, which is, most of it might be positive, but there may also be some challenges. And unless you have a clear blueprint on what to focus on or what to prioritize, it's extremely difficult to know, what questions you should ask or what you should focus on. So today, inshallah, let's talk about a very straightforward blueprint from which to assess whether or someone or not will make a suitable partner, right? And, again, to caution you that even if, you know all of these things about a person in one domain of their lives, it is, I would recommend that you do some homework to find out how they are in other domains of their life, right? Some other cautions. When you see, because I find many young people, they end up marrying a project. What do I mean by that? when you're speaking to people wanting, and they may have significant reservations about ending up with someone, but they have the strong belief that the person will change, or that they will be able to cure them. And this is a very problematic way to go into a relationship, because the thing is that everyone changes, definitely, right? We all grow and we become better human beings, inshallah, along the way. However, most people don't change on other people's agenda. They change on their own agenda. So if you see something, the rule of thumb to remember is that what you see during the courtship, the good things, they may or may not last. Okay? The bad things that you see will very likely get worse. Now, this sounds like really bad news to most people, but it's a really good idea to confront this possibility and to be ready to live with the person as you see them. It's not a good idea to marry a project thinking that you will be able to change them, because that may or may not happen, and it's a recipe for unhappiness. Also, most relationship experts agree that a 90-day is kind of a probationary period, in the sense that it takes about that long, about 3 months, for a person, for you to be able to see them in different areas of their life, for you to for them quote unquote to show their true colors. And the true colors may be in a good sense. I don't mean that in a negative way at all. So how do they manage stress? How do what happens when things begin to go wrong? So these are the kinds of things that really tell what a person is like. So what are the 5 areas that you need to get to know? And by the way, all of this is based on research, but it is also very much in line with Islamic principles. It's very close to what ahadith tell us, what we should be looking for in a spouse. So the 5 areas are what? We're going to, the acronym for them is FACES, which is what? F for family background. A is attitudes and actions of conscience. 3 is compatibility potential. And that's C. And the E in FACES is examples of other relationships. And the S is skills for communication and relationship building. Okay, so it's FACES, FACES. Again, this is a good way to assess somebody, to actually begin to know what a person is going to be like in a relationship. So let's talk about the F first, which is the family background. Now, first let's talk about why a lot of young people think that it is not that important anymore. Because again, sometimes they meet the person in a school setting or in a university setting, and they might think that they know enough about the person. Because people are living away from their families, you think the family has really no, if the person is living in North America and their family may be from another part of the world, you think how, it's not really a big force in the life, and therefore you don't need to really attend to it. However, we know that we learn a lot of things from our families. What are some of the things we learn? We definitely learn the way to handle our emotions and to give and receive love. That is the first thing that we learn as we are children. We learn how to handle and share power. So who made the decisions in our home? What were the expectations? These are unconscious learning. So, and because they're unconscious, they're that much more difficult to change. The way you learnt your family roles. So who does what in the home? This is something, again, that you pick up as children. Now, again, the idea is not to find somebody from a perfect family. That's highly unrealistic, right? It is to, first of all, alert us to potential issues and to begin working on them proactively. Also to recognize that sometimes, people from very challenging backgrounds can actually really work through them and become amazing human beings. So again, it is not, but one thing to also recognize is that how does change happen? So for example, if somebody who's come from, a fairly dysfunctional family, but they've actually self-reflected on it. They have insight, they have decided, they're not going to follow the same things, or something significant in their life has happened which has caused them to make different decisions. In the absence of these factors, people generally tend to think that what happens in our family is the norm. That is, and on many levels, even very healthy couples, these are some of the things that couples work towards. But again, for someone who is, who has issues within their family of origin, it's going to be challenging to overcome that. So that is something to recognize. The second thing, the A of faces, is the attitudes, the actions and attitudes of conscience. What does that mean? So many of us, obviously we look for people from the same faith. And if the person is from the same faith background, we assume that that they share our faith values. However, what I'm finding these days is that is not necessarily the case. Faith, religiosity, things like this mean different things to different people. So someone who is very, very regular, for example, at going to the mosque, may not have the same level of connection with God, for example, and that might not even be a thing in their life, So just because they are apparently practicing the same faith, it's a good idea to actually talk about these things. Why? Because, again, conscience is something which, you can't really teach it. It is, our internal voice which guides us. And a person with a strong conscience, even when things get tough, they will try to make things better. But when the conscience is unaware or on a different level, for example, than you, then that can be a challenge. The third thing is compatibility potential. Now, this is something that people focus a lot on. When I speak to very young couples or very young people looking to settle down, the first things that they would say is, I want somebody with the same interests as me. I want somebody, if I like to read, I want somebody who likes to read. If I like to travel, I want someone who likes to travel. If I'm a sports fanatic, I want someone to be as interested in sports. And these are nice things, but it's important to also know what predicts happiness in a marriage, number one, and number two, what kinds of compatibility are predictive. So we have three different kinds of compatibility. The first thing is personality. Personality means, how easygoing you are, how rigid you are, how clean, messy, what is your emotional temperament, what is your thinking style, do you have a sense of humor, all these things are part of our personality. Then you have a compatibility of lifestyles, which is, your work, do you have the same values and goals in terms of, how big you want to make it in the world? Are you ambitious? Do you have the same leisure habits? Do you have the same idea of what you want to do on the weekend? And do you have the same interests? So do you both like tennis, for example? Do you both like to ski, go to the museum, read, things like that? And the third type of compatibility is that of values. Values means that you have the same basic beliefs about certain things. And the three main things that values count on is faith. Do you have the same faith values? Do you have the same family values? How important is family? How important is extended family? And, what experts say is that finances play a major role in values as well, because a lot of people have a challenge in this area. Okay. So, again, as young people, we tend to go for the lifestyle and for the personality. That's what we focus on. However, anyone who is married for a long time, as well as experts in this field, believe that the only predictor of long-term marriage satisfaction or marital satisfaction is actually values, compatibility based on values. And the reason is that interests change. Think about, for people who are married over a long time, we know that as we grow, things that were really important to us in the beginning may not be that important anymore. Also, couples who are happy over the long term, they tend to become more similar. That's the second point, right? So, and also it is a good idea to actually open your mind and to see, if you have somebody who has very different interests, that's a really good way to grow. So for example, a sports fanatic, gets married to somebody who loves museums. Now these would tend to be opposite things, but this is the way that two people can actually blend together and explore worlds which they wouldn't have if they had met somebody from the same exact interests. So finding people with different interests is actually not a bad thing at all. And over the long term, it does not predict marriage satisfaction. So that's something to, it's good information to know that things, and often couples, and especially people who are not very practicing, who've come from one faith background, but they may not be very quote unquote religious at the start, they tend to believe that these things are not that important. They tend to overlook them, and what happens is as time goes on, and I've seen this with many different couples, that as time goes on, when things get tough, all of us face challenges in life. So if you encounter roadblocks, if you have obstacles in your life, you dealing with sickness or death of a family member, all of these things, that's when the values become really important. And that's when faith, which was not that important, tends to become really important. When people have kids, they think, oh, you know what, this didn't really matter to me that much. But, once you have kids, you want to do right by them. And that's when these things become really important. So it is a good idea to consider that, right from the beginning, and also to know that one of the predictors of long-lasting marriages is people from the same faith background. In other words, when you are marrying outside the faith, it is, and it may be any faith, I'm not saying only Muslim or whatever, this is just, research, and it's not usually done by Muslims, it's from the general mainstream community, is that marrying outside the faith is actually a risk factor for making the marriage last. So the E in faces is examples of other relationship patterns. So the idea is that, things that the way we relate to people tends to be generally the same. So, for example, one way to get to know somebody is look at their friends. How do they get along with their friends? How do they get along with their family, extended family? Are they able to build strong relationships? And people can be shy, that's a separate issue. But what are some of the things to look at? So for example, are they in touch with family? Are they in touch with extended family, with cousins? Do they keep in touch with friends? Do they admit when they're wrong? Do they apologize? Do they keep their promises? Are they always complaining about the relationships in their life? And one of the things, for example, sometimes, when you go to a wedding and the person is, for example, over 30 years old, they've lived in the same community for many years. And who are the people involved in the wedding? Are people they've met 6 months ago, right? So and again, these are, things to look out for. None of these are meant to say, this is it, so that's not what we're talking about, right? However, there needs to be a really good explanation. If I've been living in the same community, I've gone to the same high school, the same university as all my friends, and yet I'm choosing somebody to be my best man or to be my maid of honor, somebody who I've only known for 6 months. How many old relationships do I have in my life? That is a huge indication of what a person is like in relationships. So if they've had a history of failed relationships, and again, it's different. So if a person is on the second and third marriage, if you ask them, what, people will always say what the other person did wrong, right? But in every relationship, you need to be able to take responsibility for some of the, problems at least. And if you're not able to do that, that's a problem. That's something that you need to talk about. So people who are actually who are considering people who've been in relationships before, this should be a matter of conversation. And if you can, see how they get along with their ex relationships. people who are able to, not every relationship can be saved or should. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if they've been able to maintain some sort of relationship with someone who they knew for 10 years, that's a really good sign. That's a sign that even if they didn't get along, this person is capable of overcoming some challenges and dealing with another person on on a good basis. So that's a that's, if they are in, that's a very, very positive sign. And lastly, the last letter of FACES is S, which stands for skills of communication and relationship building. Now, what is important? Obviously we know that to be able to make a marriage work, you also need, you need all of these things, but at some level you also need to be able to communicate, you need to be able to manage your emotions, because there will be times when you will be angry. And what do you do with that anger? How do you act out? These things are important to know about a person. However, relationship skills can also be learned, and that's the really good news, right? So say, for example, if a person meets all of them, they come from a stable a stable family, they've got good relationships, they've they have a strong conscience, you share values, but they're very shy, they're not able to communicate. These things can be learned over time. So it's not a make it or break it thing, but it is something to consider. And especially if they're willing to learn, so let's, just to summarize, let's talk about, so what are the predictors of for marital satisfaction? Okay, what kinds of people make good spouses? First of all, coming from a family in healthy relationships. So, ideally in a two-parent family, but even if that's not possible, there should be at least some healthy relationships within the family, right? Being an evolved human being. So, healthy individuals make good marriage partners. If a person is generally happy, they're optimistic, they are they are able to make their own lives work, chances are that they will make healthy spouses. Being relatively mature is again a strong predictor of marriage satisfaction. And again, in our communities there is always a push for people settling down young, and again that's not a bad thing. But again, the you can be a very mature 18-year-old, you don't, and some people can be very mature, immature 40-year-olds. So generally being mature is obviously a good sign. Sharing values and faith is a very good sign. And having developed relationship skills such as communication, expression of affection, are they able to express themselves, are they able to resolve conflict, are they able to hear the other person? These are all really good signs that that a person will make a stable marriage partner. And then of course, after all of this, we still need to go with our gut. So if everything checks out, but there is something unresolved, there is you're not able to put your finger on it, but there is something which is standing in your way, that's something you should explore. Please do not ignore it, because in my experience, when couples ignore this from the beginning, it does play out in the relationship. On the other hand, also, go with your gut when things are good. So if when you meet a person, you generally like them, just as a person you like them, that's a really good sign, okay? And then you can obviously, the idea is to go with your heart and your head. Don't leave your head behind. And again, also go with your gut. So don't leave your heart behind either. And so inshallah, with a lot of du'as and good luck to all of you, inshallah, you will find people who are extremely suitable. And of course, not to forget that, all of us, when we're talking about these things, we really need to focus on being the right spouse as well, to being a person who will make a good husband, a good wife, inshallah. So what I will do in the next couple of days, inshallah, is give you a link to the either a handout or a slides to go with this talk, and it will be on the same page. So please come back and you can download that when it's up. But give me a day or two, inshallah, to get that done. And thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.